The basics behind financial health are not that complicated. Spend reasonable amounts of money to enjoy life and accomplish the goals you have today, but don't spend more than you earn lest you be unable to accomplish your goals in the future. And always be wary of an investment or financial opportunity that sounds too good to be true, because it probably is. Pretty simple, right? But if we can agree that the basics behind good financial health are pretty simple, that raises the question of why so many of us still find it so difficult to implement them. The most obvious answer is that there simply isn't enough money to go around, and while that may be true in some circumstances, in the grand scheme of things, those cases are pretty few and far between. It also wouldn't tell us why some people who have made or been given millions upon millions of dollars lost their money, sometimes within a surprisingly short period of time, or why those of modest but still workable means on paper always seem to have more month at the end of the money, or even why some of those who have a lot of money and have managed to hang on to it still suffer from some pretty serious issues linked to their fortunes. So no, there not being enough money to go around can't be the answer. Or at least it can't be the full answer. Because while basic financial health is not that difficult to understand, and its rules not that hard to implement, personal financial well-being becomes a bit more complicated. It's that personal part that always seems to trip us up. But that's okay, because that's the part that we have the greatest amount of power to work on and improve. Today, we're going to be discussing 12 money disorders that threaten our personal financial well-being, as well as how to overcome them. This information is based on the book Mind Over Money by Drs. Brad and Ted Klontz, which will be linked in the description below this video for anyone who wants to explore this topic a little deeper. Because try though I did, I was not able to include everything worth discussing from the book in this video. There's a lot more good information in there for those who are interested in the field of behavioral finance and why we act the way we do. But before we get going, be sure to like this video if you haven't already, as it really does help out the channel a lot, and subscribe with notifications on for more money-related videos like this one every single week. And if you want to further support this channel, you can check out some of the links I've left in the description below, which includes a 30-day free trial of Audible and 2 free audiobooks of your choice, as well as a list of some books on money I'd recommend checking out with your free trial. So before we get into the disorders themselves, there is something that I do want to touch on first, and this will take a little bit of explaining, so I apologize in advance for that, but I do feel that it's important to help us understand why we act the way we do in certain situations, and therefore give us the ability to eventually recover from any disorders we may be experiencing right now. With that being said, let's talk about the 3 minds we all possess, because in a roundabout sort of way, they are where money disorders come from. The 3 minds are the monkey mind, the crocodile or reptilian part of our brains, and the scientific mind. You may have heard of the monkey mind before from yoga instructors or meditation teachers. The monkey mind is sometimes referred to as the emotional center of our brain, as it's the place where emotions and thoughts begin to kick in. The monkey mind is always busy exploring everything around us, reacting to and remembering as much as it can. This helps in things like pattern recognition, which can eventually lead to things like the formation of automatic responses. And in particular, experiences with a lot of emotional resonance tend to be remembered more and are easier to recall later. Therefore, those automated responses are more likely to spring up around those types of cues. But as you can imagine, with all this going on, the monkey mind can become easily distracted, or form associations between things that, to our rational mind, wouldn't make much sense, or do us much good. That's why calming the monkey mind and becoming more aware of our thoughts and our emotions is one of the things you try to learn when working on mindfulness. It's all in an attempt to better understand and work with ourselves. The reptilian brain, often represented by a crocodile or similar reptile, is responsible for things like controlling our reflexes, balance, breathing, and heartbeat. The crocodile is always on the lookout for things that might affect our survival, and this is where the fight, flight, or freeze response comes into play. Together, the monkey mind and reptilian brain are often referred to as the animal brain. Our neocortex is the rational or scientific part of our brain, and as such is often represented by a scientist. It handles everything else that makes you, you. It helps you analyze things such as your thoughts or create narratives to make sense of what your animal brain is seeing or feeling at the time and then decide what to do next. It helps you weigh the pros and cons of a decision, come up with goals and plan out how to best reach them, and so on and so forth. Most importantly, at least in the context of this video, it's the mind over which we have the most control, and it can help us manage the responses of the other 2 minds so long as it isn't hijacked and shut out of the decision-making process altogether by the animal brain, which tends to happen quite often in high-stress situations. Since the rational mind is the most recent of the 3 minds to develop and is both the smallest and slowest to react to new situations. But we'll come back to that later when we discuss how to overcome the money disorders. For now, let's move on to where those disorders actually come from. So as I said, in a roundabout way, money disorders come from the three minds, though admittedly it's really more the animal brain that's responsible. They persist because we haven't figured out a way to overcome them yet through the rational mind. However, what's really happening is that we, often at a surprisingly young age, get what appears to be mixed signals surrounding money. Not just in terms of what it is, but in how to best handle it or avoid it as the case may be, how to value it or worship it as the case may be, and how to relate with it in day-to-day life, both individually and with others. And in an attempt to make sense of these apparently mixed signals, our scientific mind comes up with what are referred to as money scripts in the book. For example, money is the root of all evil, or you can have love or money but not both. Or even enjoying an inheritance or insurance settlement is the same as saying that I'm glad someone died. Some of these scripts may have made sense to us at the time they were formed, but often as we grow older or just get further away from the situation, they don't hold up to scrutiny. But as you can imagine, those money scripts, if left unexamined and unresolved, can have a powerful impact on our behavior without us really even realizing it at a conscious level. And they can lead to money disorders. Lastly, before we get into the disorders themselves, I know this is a lot coming in before we actually get into the meat of the video, but I do want to make one distinction. Everybody makes poor financial decisions once in a while. No matter how knowledgeable you may be, we're all human, we all make mistakes. That alone does not mean you have a money disorder, even if a mistake you make sounds a lot like one of the disorders we're about to go over. No, a money disorder is a persistent, predictable, often rigid pattern of self-destructive financial behavior that causes significant stress, anxiety, emotional distress, and impairment in major areas of our lives. If you have a money disorder, you're probably aware of what you should do, but still can't seem to shake those unhealthy behaviors no matter how much misery or suffering they may be causing you. You may also experience persistent worry, anxiety, shame, or even despair about your financial situation. You may have a lack of savings and excessive debt, or even have multiple bankruptcies in your past. You may often have conflicts with family, friends, or colleagues surrounding money. And even if you have tried to change your behaviors, you haven't been able to make those changes stick. Yet. With that being said, let's talk about the 12 money disorders. So the 12 money disorders are grouped into 3 separate categories in the book. They are money avoidance disorders, money worshipping disorders, and relational money disorders. We'll start with the 4 money avoidance disorders, then discuss the worshipping and relational disorders before wrapping up with what we can do to better manage any disorder that we may experience. The money avoidance disorders are financial denial, financial rejection, underspending, and excessive risk aversion. These disorders often have their roots in fears, anxieties, and confusion around money. Thankfully, they can often be managed with some self-reflection, education, and experimentation. Financial denial is exactly what it sounds like. It's when we try to minimize our money problems or avoid thinking about them altogether rather than face the reality of our situation. It's our way of trying to avoid feeling anxiety or shame about our current financial reality. And as you would expect, those who suffer from financial denial will often fail to go over their bank statements or credit card statements, they won't often discuss their finances with their partners, and they often attempt to find ways to rationalize this avoidant behavior when confronted about it. Naturally, this often backfires as ignoring problems we're facing only allows those problems to persist or worsen over time, which just digs ourselves into an even deeper hole. Financial rejection is a surprisingly common disorder given how much our society values money in general. Interestingly, while most of us want money and have earned every penny we've ever made, we can still feel very guilty over having it. This disorder is particularly common for those who receive death benefits, and those with lower self-esteem who don't feel that they deserve whatever money they have accumulated. Often, people with this disorder will take unconscious vows of poverty and reject any good fortune that does come their way, such as a big promotion. Even if they happen to accidentally come into some money, if this disorder is left unresolved, they will often squander most or even all of it until their financial situation falls back in line with what they feel they deserve. Now, granted, vows of poverty or rejecting a promotion is not inherently a bad or unhealthy thing if we're consciously choosing to do that. Maybe because the job we're being promoted to just doesn't interest us. But that's not the case with people who suffer from financial rejection. Underspending is a disorder that I'm willing to bet not many of you expected to see here. After all, spending less than you earn is one of the fundamental pillars of a financially successful life, but just like with anything, underspending, when taken to an extreme, can be unhealthy. I should note that underspending is different from being frugal or choosing to live a more minimalist lifestyle. Being frugal is about finding ways to be more efficient with your money. about finding ways to get the most out of every dollar that comes in the door so that you can achieve your goals and live the life you want. I did a video where I talked about how I see frugality more as joy per dollar spent, trying to maximize that formula. Minimalism is a conscious choice to try a different lifestyle with different values, namely valuing things like relationships and experiences more than stuff. Both of these behaviors can lead to spending very little money, but neither are inherently unhealthy. Underspenders may also have a lot of savings built up, but unlike their frugal and minimalist counterparts, they're oftentimes keeping themselves emotionally and experientially poor by never allowing themselves to enjoy any of that savings. And their lack of spending is less likely to be the result of a conscious choice and more likely to be the result of lingering anxiety or fear of losing everything, or a very high need for security. Excessive risk aversion is something we've touched on more than once on this channel, so I won't spend too much time on it here, but it's also exactly what it sounds like. You experience an irrational unwillingness to take any risks with your money. It's almost like perpetually experiencing a freeze response. Sure, this means that you won't likely be invested in something like the stock market when it experiences one of its occasional downturns, but it also means that you won't be riding that wave back up again. So there's a huge opportunity cost associated with this disorder over time. So those are the money avoidance disorders. Now let's move on to the money worshipping disorders. The money worshipping disorders are hoarding, unreasonable risk-taking, workaholism, and overspending. These disorders often have their roots in the past. They can be a result of examples set by your parents during childhood, some traumatic experiences that you've had, or trying to make up for lost time or some missed opportunity. Hoarding is another example of an otherwise potentially positive behavior, in this case saving, taken to an extreme. However, it differs from underspending because the hoarder may not be hoarding money by not spending. They could be hoarding anything, or everything. The authors admit that the causes of compulsive hoarding are not fully understood at the time they wrote the book, though they have noticed that in their practice it seems to be particularly common among those who've experienced time of extreme scarcity in the past. Some examples they gave were people who had lived through the Great Depression, or were brought up in a foster home where food was often in short supply. Unreasonable risk-taking is defined as putting one's financial well-being at unnecessary risk in pursuit of large but very unlikely gains, such as a parent who takes their kid's college fund to the racetrack. However, gambling is not the only form of risk-taking that we see. Trying to time the market is one that's particularly relevant for us as investors, and on a smaller scale, writing checks before you have the money to cover it, or spending bonus money before you've actually received it, could also be signs of unreasonable risk-taking. The reason for taking unreasonable risks are often as varied as the ways that you can take them. Perhaps the person is a pathological gambler, or is trying to make up for lost time or a prior market crash with one big score. Others may find themselves taking more risk than they should while they're on a winning streak because they're just feeling lucky. Still others may be taking these risks due to highly pessimistic or fatalistic worldviews. After all, if you feel like the world is coming to an end or that you'll probably lose everything anyway, what have you really got to lose? I could go on, but I think you get the point. And the potential downsides to this kind of behavior, both monetarily and otherwise, are self-explanatory. And unfortunately, this is one disorder that has no easy fix, and a mental health professional should be consulted before taking any drastic actions. Workaholism is a particularly sinister disorder because it's one that our society actually values and people take pride in. Granted, being a hard worker with a strong work ethic is a great thing, but just like with these other disorders, when taken to an extreme, it's not the most healthy thing. Workaholics have little time for their friends, families, leisure, or in some cases even sleep, which can have obvious consequences both now and down the road, especially if the workaholic has kids. Workaholism often stems from a few things. One is that it's often passed down to you by examples set by your parents. Another is that the workaholic feels that working harder and earning more money will make them happy. Granted, to a point, there is some truth to this. Studies have found that making enough money to raise yourself out of poverty will indeed increase happiness pretty consistently. However, if you go too much beyond that, the correlation between earning more money and being happier tends to fall off quite a bit, to the point where there's really almost no direct correlation between the two anymore. Overspending is the final disorder in the money worshipping category, and those who routinely overspend are often trying to achieve feelings of safety, comfort, affections, or wholeness by spending excessively on themselves or others. It's sometimes caused by a past experience that was emotionally traumatic. Perhaps the person was bullied for not having the right clothes when they were young. Other times it's caused by a belief that money is completely unimportant, so hey, why not spend it freely? This can obviously lead to things like excessive debt, bankruptcies, emotional distress, marriage issues, and a whole host of other problems if left unchecked. But that'll do it for the money worshipping category. The relational money disorders are financial infidelity, financial incest, enabling, and dependency. They often spring up for a few reasons. Either the person with them grew up in a household where money was a taboo subject and thus learned to be pretty secretive around it, or others have tried to control them using money as their tool of abuse, and the person has brought those lessons with them into later life. Financial infidelity is when someone is deliberately keeping major secrets about their spending or general financial situation from their significant other. In addition to the causes that we just went over, financial infidelity can also stem from a lack of trust in the relationship. Unfortunately, if these secrets are eventually revealed, it could make those trust issues even worse than they were before. The authors mention that they've seen financial infidelity in their work so often that they've come up with a 4-step program to work through it. First, you need to establish a sense of financial safety with your partner by broaching the topic of money openly and calmly. Second, you both need to agree to a plan regarding spending and saving. Essentially like a budget, but with the added caveat of figuring out an amount of money that each person can spend on a single purchase without needing to consult the other. Third, of course, you need to follow the agreement to the best of your ability. This is often the most difficult part, as you would imagine, so the authors recommend starting with a 30 or 60-day trial of the budget so that you can renegotiate anything that isn't working for you before things get out of hand. And fourth, you need to establish an emergency plan response before an emergency strikes. This part is more than just establishing your typical 3 to 6 month emergency fund. It's also about figuring out what you guys want to do if you should arrive at an impasse with your partner on some issue that comes up. Financial incest is the term used by the authors to describe when someone is using money to manipulate another person, often a child in their experience. This can be damaging to anyone, but particularly to a child, as the behaviors they experience growing up can stick with them long after entering adulthood. Enabling involves an irrational need to give money to others, whether you can afford it or not, and even if the money is to do something that is not in the person's best interests. This often comes about because the enabler has learned to equate money with love. More often than not, their intentions are good, but the results are not. After all, you don't want to hand a drunk a bottle. It's just not going to end well. Financial dependency is often linked with enabling as well. Dependents are essentially waiting for their knight in shining armor, be it the government, the lottery, a benevolent universe, a parent, or a partner, to come and save the day. Obviously, completely leaving your financial well-being in the hands of others can have disastrous results. Even if that somebody does save today, it will almost always lead to the dependent's sense of autonomy and ambition being sapped, which can leave them feeling lost and helpless the next time if nobody does, in fact, save the day. But many people continue to do it because it protects them from having to take ownership over their own financial education, plans, and situation. So you can see how these money disorders can have a tremendous effect on our day-to-day lives, both financially, of course, but in other areas as well. So how do we overcome them? Well, the specifics will differ a bit depending on the person, but the solution the authors offer is to become a student of yourself. For instance, practicing things like mindfulness can help you discover the things that trigger you financially. It probably won't help you stop the trigger from happening. I mean, those money scripts will likely always be with you in some form or another, but it can make it easier for you to recognize it for what it actually is when it does happen, and take a step back from the situation, calm yourself down, before rationally deciding what to do next. Essentially, you're bringing the scientific part of your brain back online and not just letting the monkey and the crocodile run the show, which generally leads to better outcomes because, let's face it, the scientist is by far the smartest of the three. Again, the specifics of how you want to go about studying yourself will differ from person to person. Some will practice meditation in an attempt to find and resolve those unresolved issues. Others will study up on finance itself so that they have more options available to them when fear or anxiety steps in. Still others will take advantage of counseling or therapeutic services. The same goes for having a financial advisor in your corner. You'd be surprised how many financial advisors have advisors of their own. Again, we're all human, and we're all prone to having emotions run wild from time to time. It's good to have people in your corner to provide that fresh perspective, or talk you off the financial ledge once in a while. Many people will try a bunch of these options, but whichever way you decide to go, it's important to remember that these disorders are not in control of you. You can overcome them. All you need to do is choose to start now. But that'll do it for me today. Once again, if you enjoyed this video, be sure to smash that like button if you haven't already, subscribe, and hit that bell next to my name so you'll be notified of all my future uploads. I generally upload every single Monday, and if you have a friend that would be interested in this kind of content, be sure to share it with them. Let's really get this information out there and start our own financial revolution.